Yes, I do personally think that Canada is a better country now than it used to be, because Canada is more developed now and it has changed drastically. Canada has evolved in many ways, and because of Canada's history, it has changed for the better. Here are some examples in Canada's history that shows that we have changed and it has become a better place. One way that I know for sure that Canada has started to change for the better is the change that it has made for women in the recent years of Canada's history. Before, women were not even considered persons and were considered lesser than a man. Their job was only to be housewives and to take care of the children and the house. During the time period of World War I, although it was a tragedy for Canada, many Canadian women earned a sense of social worth and independence because they were able to get jobs and fill up the places of male soldiers that had left to fight in the war, or they were able to participate in the war as nurses and drivers. As the time periods of World War I and World War II ended, women were still seen as lesser than men. Cases such as the Murdoch versus Murdoch case helped spark a start of equality for women. Irene Murdoch, a woman from Calgary, wanted a divorce from her mentally and physically abusive husband. When she went to court to fight for half of the ranch that they owned together, she was only given a measly $200 a month. Irene believed that she deserved half of the earnings of the ranch because she had always done the same work of a man on the ranch, and she, on top of that, had done the work of a wife. To the fact that she was a woman and the sexist stereotypes of the 1970s, the courts voted in her abusive husband's favor because they saw her as only doing the regular jobs of a housewife and not being as important as her husband. Though she did not win the first case, Irene helped spark the start for equality for women as women start to notice that they were being treated unjustly in their husbands and by the justice system of Canada, who are supposed to be protecting them. Another case that Canada has improved from is the Laval case. In 1970, an Ojibwe Native woman named Jeanette Corbière-Laval married a non-Indigenous man named David Laval. Because she married a non-Indigenous man, under the rules of the Indian Act, Jeanette was no longer considered an Indian. Jeanette knew the unfair rules of the Indian Act were only biased towards women, so she decided to challenge the act in 1971. Although she lost the case, thanks to influences from strong Canadian women such as Irene Murdoch and Jeanette Laval, Canada has many federal laws to protect women and to encourage equality for all races and genders. Also, women have started to fight for their rights by doing things like women's marches to help empower women. Canada has made a lot of mistakes in the past, but we are using our knowledge of the mistakes we've made in the past to help bring forth equality for all races and cultures in our communities. The humongous mistake that Canada made in the past was the creation of residential schools. Residential schools forcibly pulled children of the Indigenous race aged 7 to 15 from their homes and forced them to a school where they were subject to deculturation. The children were also forced to adapt to the Catholic religion and lifestyle and to forget about all of their Indigenous roots. Although the last residential school was closed in 1996, the stain of terror and abuse is still left on many Indigenous families in Canada. After a long-awaited time, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, delivered an apology to the thousands of Indigenous people all over Canada to address the mistreatment they were subject to in residential schools. Now, in 2017, to help better our country and bring equality for all cultures and groups, Indigenous people have been given their own personal part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Human Rights Act to ensure that every individual's rights are maintained under the law. Other events that Canada has improved from the past is when the Canadian Bill of Rights and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was created. The Canadian Bill of Rights was enacted in Parliament under the leadership of Prime Minister Diefenbaker on August 10, 1960. The 1960 Canadian Bill of Rights was one of Canada's first federal laws to protect human rights and fundamental freedom. The Canadian Bill of Rights was replaced by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms on April 17, 1982, along with the rest of the acts in Canada that entailed fundamental rights. As stated in the Constitution Act of 1982, the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free democratic society. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media or communication, freedom of peace assembly, and freedom of association. democratic rights. Every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election of members of the House of Commons or of a legislative assembly and to be qualified for membership therein. All in all, I do believe that Canada is a better country now than it was before, because as shown through this video, Canada has used the mistakes it has made in the past as knowledge to help better our country and improve our Canadian identity. Thank you for listening and paying attention to my culminating activity and my ideas and facts on why I believe that Canada is a better country now than it was before.